Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. Now, ever so often on the program, we welcome personalities with whom we can interact on various issues pertaining not only to their own lives and the journey that they have traveled and the lessons that we can learn from that, but their opinions on issues pertaining to the country, on issues pertaining to the community, to the ummah, global issues. People that are well known for a reason. It's because they are involved or they were involved in certain sectors, in certain areas, through which they gained a lot of experience, through which they gained a lot of perspective that you don't ordinarily get from other individuals. So that's the reason why from time to time we bring to the table, we bring to the program so-called high-profile personalities. It's not about just having the name or the brand on the program. It's about gleaning from the experience. It's about tapping into their perspective and how they view the key issues and the burning issues of the day, be it the Ummah-related issues or South African-related issues or general global issues. And there's always so much that we can learn from everyone that we meet. I once was interacting with the great scholar Mufti Ismail Menk, and he said, I have this philosophy in life. Every single person that I meet, I try and learn at least one thing from them. No matter who the person is, well known or otherwise, experienced or not that experienced, everyone has something, that one thing that they can teach you. And if you are humble enough and willing enough to learn from each person that you meet in your life, then you will learn and you'll be the richer for it. Now, the person that we have in studio this evening is a familiar voice and a familiar face to many of our viewers out there. He's been on the program before as well. I've had the honor and the privilege of sharing a studio with him, and it's none other than well-known media personality Ashraf Garda. Ashraf, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome once again.
Wa alaikum salam. And certainly an honor to be here in the light of your introduction, because I think we must accept that we now have the privilege of the platform, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed we do. Now, many people may be wondering, I think it was earlier this year that your stint at SAFM came to an end. What have you been doing since then?
Well, yeah, so it came to an end around March, and the plan always, even before it ended, and if you ask me up front, did I want it to end? The answer is no, okay? But lots of things happened that causes it to end. In the interim, two things have happened. Lots of planning around truly growing the Champion South Africa movement, which is a movement that we tested like a couple of years ago in terms of where we want to go, and I'm happy to talk about that in a second. But at in the same time, also speaking to lots of different people with views to collaboration, particularly around digital broadcast. So I'm talking about, podcasting and YouTubing and using other social media forums that you'll be well acquainted with. And hopefully the plan is to put that all together, coming to this nice number 2020.
We will get to Champion South Africa in a bit, but I just want to, learn a little bit about what adjustment do you need to make? I mean, you've been with SAFM for a number of years. You're in a very public space. All of a sudden, as you say, it comes to an end. Not that you really wanted it to come to an end, but circumstances prevailed. The day after that, and the week after that, and the month after that, how did it feel? What were your emotions? What kind of adjustment did you have to make? Because many people find themselves in a situation, they may not necessarily be on a radio platform, but a particular job that they've done for many years that they loved doing, and it came to an end before they were willing for it to come to an end, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's an important mental issue that you talk about, that we all can relate to no matter what our fields are, right? So at that time, the obvious adjustment for me when it came to an end is like, because I'm less emotional about these type of things. So it's like, okay, 31st of March, that's it, end of story, get your mind right, move it and move on, okay? And that has been the adjustment on the one hand. On the other, this thing about withdrawal symptoms are pretty obvious. Especially, you went into an election, lots of things happened, and lots of high-profile cases continue to take place right now, and you're not part of it. You're not part of asking the type of questions. So to give you one example, classically, and it's not even about current affairs, it's about sport, during the 2007 Rugby World Cup, at the press conference that was held at the OR Tambo International Airport after the Springboks won the World Cup then, right? The very first question at that presser was done by me, okay, the very first one. This time round, the very first question was done by someone who said, what are the highs and lows of Japan? And I'm like saying, no, I would have asked something very, very different. So at that stage, you realize you've had a great run, but you also realize, like, I wish I was a part of that, because all the time when you're on the air, you're always aware that you represent a whole community of people. And I don't mean community in the narrow sense, community in the whole country of listeners or viewers. So, yeah, degrees of withdrawal symptoms even now. If you ask me to do something fascinating and fantastic and I'd want to do it, absolutely.
Does it knock your confidence, this kind of an event?
You mean in terms of going on
Does
the
your confidence take a bit of a dip in terms of now having to do something different, having to get to psych yourself up for something very different to what you had become accustomed to doing?
It's a difficult one to say. I'm tempted to say it does, but that would be lying if I felt that it knocked my confidence. Okay, so no, I don't think it knocks the confidence, because confidence is very linked to ability.
Yeah.
So ability, I have no question. Alhamdulillah is there. It can knock self-esteem, which is different, right? Because self-esteem is something ingrained, inbred, part of your DNA, and that's a very important driver of your own personal success. And I suppose one can question it. Now, one of the things that certainly came through was I had made myself available to do a whole lot of freelance things for whoever, right? And there were lots of mainstream radio and TV that, yes, we'll talk to you, yes, we'll do this. And even if I didn't want to do it permanently, because I never really wanted to do it permanently, right? Those things happen and then actually don't happen, and then they get delayed and they get left by the wayside. And the reality, and I'm saying it with humility for all of us, that there's a day that you have a seat at the front table, and there's a day that you don't have a seat at the front table. So if it means that how do you adjust with not having a seat at the front table, and how do you manage to cope? It does, to a degree, knock the self-esteem, not so much the confidence, but then that has to be replaced with understanding a greater purpose in life, to say what's next for you and what's more important. And I'm happy to talk about that next year.
Did it force you to discover certain things which you perhaps should have discovered earlier but didn't, because you were caught in a particular routine and you had to give a certain amount of time to your media career? Have you been doing things in the last few months that you didn't get time to do previously, which you really turned out to enjoy?
Yeah, well, yes and no, in a sense that, I mean, if there was one thing I probably should have spent more time on, there's a phrase, you spend too much time in the job and not on the job. And even as an owner, you need to work on the job, right, from outside. I probably should have spent a lot more time getting involved in production, particularly television production, in terms of understanding the business, because I do enjoy that, but you get so caught up with your work, you don't spend enough time on that. And probably should have spent more time working on delivering keynote addresses, because I certainly love program directing, and I do a lot of that, and I do the odd keynote addresses, and I enjoy that. But I'm talking about sort of building a portfolio of keynotes a good 10 years ago. But when you do program directing, especially in the mainstream community, not necessarily the Muslim community, then inevitably that's what you're going to get asked to do, program directing and facilitating, and then let someone else do keynote speaking. So if there's probably, I'm not going to say regret, but there's probably one thing I probably should have spent more time on, was that, and certainly the production part. And the other one, and my wife was probably watching, because she's been nagging me about this, to say, Ashraf, when are you going to write the book? So I do need to put my mind together and pay lots more attention to that.
What would you like to write about?
It would be about my journey, and I know exactly what I think the title will be. The problem, of course, is publishers tend to change titles. You have a plan, and they're like, we don't think that's going to work. And for me, it's not about exposés, but it's certainly my journey, because I think I have a fascinating journey in terms of trials and tribulations and success, and now not being on air to a point where I think I should be on air, and I think those are things that people can learn from, right? And the title of the book, so this is like the working title of the book, has come from something I've mentioned on air when you've spoken to me before, and I always wondered about, like, what should be the title that would best describe where I am, where I've been, and where I need to go in the future? And loosely speaking, it's that conversation that I've mentioned in Mina with myself and Moulana Samson.
Yes.
And I related that I'm happy, I want to go home. And it would be something like, I have a country to build.
Wow.
Because that in the essence is where I want to go next.
Now that you've been out, of studio for a while,
yeah.
Have you been able to give some thought on the state of media, radio in particular, media in general in South Africa? What have you been observing now that you're not so involved in the day-to-day broadcast side of things?
I think it's similar to what it was. There's lots of talent. There's pockets of sheer excellence, right? and there's pockets where people are pretty bland and pretty ordinary, and that's problematic, and they tend to, I wouldn't say get the stories wrong, because they get the stories wrong out of mischief making or fake news or some agenda, but they don't pay enough attention to understand that ultimately every question you ask on radio or television in particular has to be delivered to an audience, so you speak on their behalf and nobody else. So I've still seen that. I've seen good, and I've seen average, and I've seen mediocre, and that has continued. The other changes I've seen, but I've seen it even when I was there, so they haven't been radical, but definitely more so now than ever before. Breaking stories are coming through on social media. So as a media practitioner, like someone like yourself, it's not enough for yourself to be on ITV and on Radio Islam. You actually have to be a news thought leader on the social media space, on Twitter particularly, and you are, for example, because more and more people are running to that, and that's what's going to happen. So the key, therefore, is you can't actually say I'm a radio presenter or a TV presenter. You're whatever you want to call yourself, right? You're a person who works in the media space, and you work on multiple platforms, 3, 4 sometimes, and the key is how does all that converge.
In terms of the state of media, there's a lot of talk about juniorization of newsrooms. There's a lot of talk about cut and paste journalism. As much as social media has broadened access and has given a lot of people a voice that never had a voice because it was pretty much monopolized, the bigger platforms. And then there's also been this lament about that there isn't that degree of originality and authenticity. Many media houses just trying to ape what the others are doing or what the bigger ones are doing, and you see a very similar kind of style and narrative across different newspapers, different news channels, different talk shows. What are your thoughts on some of those talking points when it comes to South African media in specific?
Well, I think the juniorization is obvious. I think that's been going on for a good few years. One is maybe there's a push to get junior people, so understandably, but secondly, it's actually cheaper. So it's cheaper to get junior people. What it does, it plays out in a way that you actually don't have solid anchors, and I don't mean anchor in the anchor sense, but strong people who actually will run a show. If you look at, for example, the model in what the BBC and Al Jazeera and CNN in particular, vastly speaking, the anchors are old. Not old as in over the hill. They're solid, but you're not going to get lots of young people. There has been in the South African scenario a trend to sort of do the celebrity hiring, because people have a big, now this is the contradiction of what I said, because they have a big social media following and almost a celebrity social media following. It's like, okay, they can do a job because they're going to bring in listeners and viewers, but the reality is that there's a short retention span. If you don't deliver, people have the option as quickly as they're watching you to actually swap to another channel, and I do it, and I'm sure you do it as well.
Yeah, interesting indeed. Time for the first break. When we come back, we speak to Ashraf about Champion South Africa. Welcome back. So in studio this evening, we're speaking to well-known media personality Ashraf Gadda. Prior to the break, we were talking about the state of media in South Africa and Ashraf's own adjustment period after his show on SAFM came to an end. Now, Ashraf, you spoke earlier on about Champion SA, and you have mentioned previously about that conversation with Dawood Sampson post-Hajj, where you said, as much as I enjoyed the Hajj, I want to go home because I have a country to build. Yeah. Does Champion South Africa, is it rooted in your sense of purpose, in your life purpose?
Yes, absolutely, and I'll tell you why. When the idea was piloted, in fact, with a conversation with my son, myself and my son, ironically, it was done on the basis of let's identify champions and winners in their space. But as we've sort of laid out the discourse, right, it's come to mean a whole lot more, to the point where if I was now offered an opportunity to do something permanent in media, whatever it may be, the first default would be, how does it fit in with the greater purpose? So if you ask me, therefore, what is my purpose now? Purposes can change, right? What is my purpose now, right? My purpose is to find, to identify, and to build the people of South Africa into the champion people needed to build the champion nation that we sort of code word call Champion South Africa. And once you understand that, you then understand that you must be a catalyst to creating the opportunities and the interventions on a day-to-day basis to try and build these champion people.
So is Champion SA pretty much a kind of rally call to grassroots civil society that we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel within our respective spaces? We all need to work with the greater purpose in mind, and that is not only serving your individual interests, but serving the broader interests of the country. Is that what it's about in essence?
Well, on the one hand, it's a rally call, but it's not necessarily a mass-based rally call, sort of hoo-ha, let's go and chant. It's actually not that, right? It is a rallying call to your personal conscience, right? In terms of, so you're a citizen of this country, and I'm very clear about this, even if you're living, and I'm talking about migrants, if you're living in South Africa, I don't care about your ID, you're South African. I feel very strongly about that. So that means you are contributing to the country, okay? So it's a prick to your conscience to say, then what's your purpose to this country? So in wartime, you go and you defend your country. But in peacetime, what then do you do? And thank Allah, we're in a state of peace. We have conflict, but overall we have peace, right? So the commitment must be to deliver for yourself and the country the very best country you can deliver. And I use sporting examples for this because people understand sport well. So often when you watch the rugby team playing or the cricket team playing and they're underperforming, for example, you're like, no man, but they need to do better. But currently we're a country that's mid-table as a nation with negative GDP, very low, massive unemployment. So if we applied and we took South Africa as a country and we put that into sporting terms, then where are we as a country? We're a country mid-table hovering above the relegation zone. So considering that you live here, this is where we are, this is where we've made our lives and our living, and as Muslims, this is where we enjoy amongst the highest expressions of freedom as Muslims in the world, right? What do you want to do about it? Do you feel that you want to contribute to the country where you live, or do you feel yourself as an outsider? And that's the type of essence of where we want to prick to say, what's your responsibility? Now, and our feeling, therefore, is that make the commitment to be a champion yourself in whatever field you're at, and then try and use that to inspire other people to become these champion people so that we collectively as a group can shift the country, because we need critical mass, we need the numbers to become the champion nation. And one of the phrases that I use often, because it's an important one, is champion people build champion people. That means you only can become a true champion person if you can create someone else who can do the same thing as you. So champion people become champion people, and champion people build champion nations. Because in the history of the world, you can go through, and I will use the Islamic example because of where we are, that we all are aware of the Nabuwwat and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam being honored with prophethood, and the status of the Sahaba and building that first community of Islam in Medina. So can we not say that community that spread from Medina back to Mecca and then all around the world within 100 years of Spain, in Granada in Spain to China, are effectively, in Muslim speak, they were the champion people. So in the South African speak, if we want to follow the Sunnah, right, then wouldn't that be the same thing? Try and create the champion people in this country to impact on our country, and therefore to change mindsets and inshallah to change civilization in our country completely.
I want to come back to a point that you touched on, and that speaks about psyche. How important is it to look at psyche, even though conditions may not be ideal? Because many times conditions are beyond what you can control. Ordinary South Africans are not responsible for the mass corruption that crippled Eskom and SAA and put our economy in the state that it is in. But usually, I know in cricketing circles, they talk about that Aussie kind of psyche, and that's why they tend to prevail even against odds. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, I think it's critical. So one of the things we will do, inshallah, going into 2010, right, is to create events and roll out social media messaging around a key point called the champion mind. So not even mindset, but mind. Get the mind right to think like a champion, and that's the first step to becoming a champion. Get the mind thinking that I can't do, and not only will you not do, your entire country will not do. Because again, I look at the example of the Medina example. If those people believed lesser of themselves, which is different to modesty, you can be modest because you you understand that all the barakah comes from Allah. But if they feel less about themselves, they would not have had the zeal to say, let us send the message to all those big leaders around the Middle East, because they would have felt, well, we're fine with each other. Let's not get to the big shots. So the same principle applies here. We need to have the champion mind to get ourselves right first, and then to pass it on to other people.
So what's the program of action then for Champion SA 2020? Who will be the role players? What kind of framework do you have in place? What kind of events are you looking at?
Well, amongst the things, so some of the thoughts have changed, and I'll tell you what. Initially, it was identifying champions, highlighting them, amplifying them in the hope that other people will be inspired by them. We held it back for a year or so with one significant issue, that to become a champion nation, you need to be critical as well as praising. And as initially it was always going to be hoo-ha, praising. It's like, hold it. We need to identify problems in education. We need to identify problems in race relations or race around poverty, unemployment, etc. But the difference is not from a negative point of view to say we identify it, we spotlight it, but our goal ultimately is we want to deliver the champion nation, right? So with that in mind, some of the changes will roll out in the next few months, right? We'll still get a whole lot of people to support the broader campaigns, and there are many people, alhamdulillah, that are there, but I won't mention the names now. I need to we'll do it at the right time. We'll get them. Then the plan is to at least spread it to the schools, because I think schools are key in getting to the youth, but also getting to the masses of the country, to be able to get them to change that champion mind that I spoke about earlier on. Then, of course, these points about these champion mind events, but at the same time having debates around key issues. And the other part that I referenced was, of course, the digital podcasting and YouTubing that I speak about. It would actually be, initially the plan I was like, maybe I'll do something that mimics what I did before, but now it would actually fall under the Champion South Africa banner. So a lot of that will come through. Part of that also mentoring, and I think the key part that we spoke about earlier on will come through, which is making decisive interventions. So when there's a problem, or if there's no problem, when there's opportunity, what do you do about opportunity?
We all know where South Africa is. I think we speak quite often about the problems, perhaps not in a way that is solution-orientated often enough. In your opinion, what role should civil society be playing now in terms of taking this country forward? What is the specific demand on civil society?
I think we need to be clear that we need to hold our leadership accountable, and leadership means everybody in parliament, irrespective of which political party they are, and whoever is the president, because once he's the president, he represents all of us. So we need to be very clear about that, including the mosques. And I'm particularly, in my opinion, I'm critical of the role of the mosques in not playing up the nation building or country building agenda. I think they need to do a lot more around that part. So we need to do that as civil society. We need to create the type of activism that we speak about. Champion South Africa is one of them, but they're not the only ones. There are hundreds of different organizations playing that role. But the key thing is to play the role, but plug in to whatever the national agenda is. So I believe our national agenda must be that we must ultimately become a champion nation. Others may have a slightly different definition. It actually doesn't matter what the definition is. We must be plugged into that. But in being plugged into that, one thing we mustn't lose sight of is two things. In fact, one is the mind change, to develop a DNA. So, we speak about Ubuntu as one of them. What is the typical South African DNA? What's our culture? What defines us as people, right? One of the things that's missing, and my good friend, the chairperson of Productivity SA, Mthunzi Mjaba, would remind me to say, DNA, or rather productivity, is missing from our top 10 requirements in South Africa. It's not even part of the National Development Plan, which is crazy, right? So it needs to be part of the DNA. And then very importantly, we need to not lose sight of South Africa's non-racial democratic agenda. There are forces that play left and right of the center who are finding favor and fashion with being narrow and myopic and blatantly playing up a race card from all sides. And we, who represent the middle ground of South Africa, need to speak up all the more for a non-racial South Africa.
Do you think that the starting point in many ways is discourse? The discourse is too negative, where it focuses and amplifies only the problems. You have to be aware of the problems, but we're not solution orientated in our discourse. The narrative contains a very small element of solutions.
Well, I think absolutely. If you just follow our politicians, and here I'm actually saying the ANC, the DA, the EFF in that order, and then all the other smaller political parties, it is such a rare occurrence at the moment that when you listen to them and when you watch them, are they genuinely putting South Africa first? They are like school kids squabbling about, some sweet that the other child apparently has stolen. And they're arguing about that when we've actually got a country to build and a country that has to survive and endure. And then I must say, is across the board. So the moment you find a DA person falls foul of something, the ANC and the EFF will make fun of it. Conversely, the EFF does something, the other two make fun, and the third one does something, they do so. So there's a lack of maturity, which then tells you there's a lack of an end goal and a united end goal. And if you go back to 1976, right, because you speak about civil activism and that particular spark around education for youngsters, ultimately the end goal was an education that was good enough for us. Now, why can't we understand that we are on a boat, right, rowing the boat, and we all have to row together, even if we don't like each other. If we're not going to tolerate each other and understand that to row together is the only way, with rhythm and harmony, is the only way we're going to get to the other side, we have a problem.
Yeah. All right, we take a break. When we come back, inshallah, we continue the discussion with Ashraf Garda. Welcome back. The conversation continues with Ashraf Garda. We spoke in the previous segment about his project, Champion SA, and the thinking behind it and what they hope to achieve in the coming year, 2020. We also spoke earlier in the program about the state of media and Ashraf's own experience in that regard. We focus now a little bit more about the Muslim community in South Africa. Broadly speaking, Ashraf, what's your analysis of the current state of the Muslim community in the country?
I think we myopic. I think I'm very concerned that we put ourselves on the periphery. So it's like we're good citizens because we pray, alhamdulillah. We're good citizens because we don't steal. I'm not saying Muslims don't steal. They do steal, right? But by and large, as a community, we don't do that. So we find as long as we do that, we're okay. Muslims have got to be seen, they've got to be part of the solutions of this country for all the reasons I've mentioned before, and they've got to plug into, country building and the country building agenda. And I don't see that. So I would go through, like say weeks like it could be now, it could be the past, where people would speak about issues like 16 days of activism and maybe around June 16th and Youth Day. And you would find the discourse, not just on the day, but even in the week, in that mosque, it just passes by like as if it's not happened. And then what's more important to us is what's going on in countries like Syria and they all are important, notwithstanding that. So, but the fact is that reality, this is where we live, right? And for all intents and purposes, this is where we are, and this is where we need to grow and we need to make an impact. And and clearly, as you know, I'm certainly no Muslim scholar. I'm not going to act like that, but I'm certainly someone who is inspired by a lot of the Islamic faith. And I just wonder of all the attributes of the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why is it we don't play up this attribute where he's been described as Rahmatul lil Alameen, a mercy unto the worlds? And my clear understanding, worlds mean everybody, Almal, alles, it's everybody. And we don't play that up. So even in our mosques, right, a lot of the discussion is like, what's good for us? So we'll even make dua, right? And we make dua for those who are oppressed. And we talk about Muslim brothers and sisters. But the reality, and I'll use Nigeria as a classic example, the issue around Boko Haram is oppression by Muslims against non-Muslims. So how is it we're not saying, let's make dua that our Muslims turn away from being oppressors to those who are good servants of humanity, right? And in the South African context, I think I'm very concerned that we don't play up the Rahmatul lil Alameen. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm saying, one is we need to be part of the nation building agenda. That's a given, right? I don't think we do enough of that. Secondly, in terms of the problems we see as a country, we have too many Muslim-only discussions. And I'm suggesting that there must be Muslim solutions to South Africa's problems. And I'm suggesting that people will cotton onto those solutions no matter where it comes from. So let me give you an example. I mean, you have a mobile phone in front of you. You're not even asking what's the religion of that phone or the person who's created it. You use it because it actually benefits you at that point in time. So if we, for example, look at the issue of the banking system and the issue of usury and interest and how exploitative it may be seen to be, and there are many people in the world calling for major change around capitalism, right? And now moving towards a shared economy. Now, shared economy by and large between capitalism and socialism would be Islam smack bang in the middle. If we are able to popularize the Islamic system, even if it's not called Islamic system, so it doesn't have to be called that. It's just like if we rahmatul lil alameen, because we must follow that, then say, here's the model, start using it. If they want to call it shared values, that's fine, right? So we're not doing that. And I'm suggesting we can do that across the board. The other part that I'm particularly concerned about is the issue of race in South Africa amongst Muslims. The very fact, I'm aware there was the Black Muslim conference a few months ago. The more I speak to people involved in that conference, the more I completely empathize with the reasons that they had the conference, right? And here's my long and short story of it. In a country like South Africa, where we're still hovering around 3% Muslims, predominantly of North Indian and Malay origin, right? It means the gains are very low. The other gains have come from new immigrants in the country. But in terms of the indigenous population, we know the numbers have gone up, but they're negligible. So again, to use a sporting example, when you and I are talking, we talk about rugby transformation, and if we had a 100% white team now, we would be furious about it. We'd say, where's the transformation? And the same with cricket, and the same with soccer. Now, I'm suggesting, if someone said, you're Muslim, you're non-racial, you're completely non-racist in your ethos, where is the African or Black Muslim leadership in the country that are Muslims that are part of your leadership? And I'm suggesting, if you ask me, I also will have difficulty mentioning 2-3 names. And that's embarrassing, and that's because we don't have them, and that's because, or we don't even know the names. Meaning, unfortunately, if we look at the example of the Medina example, where the Medina people were Ansarullahs, they helped the people of Makkah, and if we follow that same example in South Africa, then unfortunately or fortunately, Muslims in this country must understand, for Islam to endure, they have to give up their space at the front table. There's no other way to do it. If you're going to leave it the way it is, you are going to create what may happen at that Black Muslim conference, which is the beginning of a parallel Muslim adherence in this country. You know, a different type of mosque, a different type of people, and I think that's wrong. And the only way to do that is you need to embrace it. We need to have more African speakers or Black speakers in our mosques. We need to have more Black imams in our mosques, more hufaz, and if they're not getting them, like someone made the point, we need to have a Muslim school in Soweto. So if we say money is a problem, then how are we building 1,000 other mosques elsewhere? Then it has to become a priority for us. So I feel very strongly that is an area we are slipping up totally. The other one is the issue of women. I'm certainly a big supporter, some may differ with me, of women having their place in the mosques. And it should be a position now where that every mosque, in my opinion, it must be compulsory that they actually have the women's space. It can't, otherwise you're going to the apartheid system where you say, we have our space, you have your space. So again, what may happen, and I'm looking at it from a position of practicality, don't do that. Let's stay with the ideology we've had all the time. But you know it's practiced everywhere in the world, right? And you will again create a parallel female Muslim leadership in this country. Because more and more female Muslim women are articulating themselves, highly articulate in leadership positions in this country, and they're not going to take it being sidelined. I'm not suggesting they must be the imams, not at all. Yeah. What I'm saying to you is that their use of the mosques must be encouraged, and the discourses and the debates must happen in the mosques. Otherwise, you're going to get parallel societies. So parallel Muslim women societies, parallel Muslim, Black Muslim societies, and that is to the detriment of Muslims. So I'm suggesting in sporting terms, we say, hey, we want transformation. Well, I'm all for transformation of our South African Muslim community.
On the one hand, we hear many people talking about the the improvements that the Muslim community has made in the last 20 or 30 years. The quality of lectures, whilst it may not be where it's supposed to be, it's far better than what it was, say, in the 80s and on the early 90s. Overall, the educational structure within the Muslim communities, the level of racism, it was far more acute a few decades back than it was now. So there has been that improvement, but then, as you say, it seems like we have stagnated a bit, perhaps even retrogressed a little bit. What would you attribute it to? Where are we going wrong? Because this generation of South African Muslims ought to be more plugged in, not that insular. In the 80s, apartheid, social conditioning played a part. Not that it's an excuse. You to some extent, it was understandable why you were so insular, why you were so disconnected from the broader realities in your country, let alone the broader, global realities. Now we live in a global village. Everyone ought to be having that much broader understanding, that broader perspective on issues. Why aren't we moving at the pace that we need to move? What would be the root issues for you?
Well, of course, I'm not an imam. I'm not part of the clergy, so maybe I should put the same question to you, and you can tell us. But therefore, my guess from the outside, right, is broadly speaking, the mosques in our country across the board are run by imams, by the ulama. So whether it's Jamiat al-Ulama or MJC, that's the people who run it, right? And they therefore have a very important role, right? My gut feeling about it is it's the classic scenario of we non-Muslim, or rather we're Muslim, we're non-racist. Our religion says that, and therefore we embrace everybody, and we allow it. But we actually, and this is the point, we don't truly make space for them. What I mean by that is we're asking people to fit into your narrative. You see, you can be a Muslim, and you can dislike Indian culture. You can be a Muslim and not particularly like Malay culture, and a Muslim and not like Zulu culture, because Islam supersedes all of that. What I find is hugely problematic when you go to a mosque in South Africa, so let's say in the community in Johannesburg where I live, right? Typically, it's as if you have to fit into the culture of that mosque. Now, meaning it's a predominantly Indian-based or predominantly Malay culture. Now, I'm saying greater efforts has got to be made, not just with getting the imams right, but getting the discourse right. So, trivial example, when you say, for example, during a Jummah, well, today I can speak longer because I know you don't have to go to shop because it's a public holiday. The assumption made is your congregation has got a shop. And that's not true any longer. It's not even true for Indian Muslims, although it's part of the heritage, right? It's not true for many. And it's particularly not true for Somalians who are there, people who are Malawians who are there, people who are Zulu speaking. All of them are sitting like, you're clearly not talking to me. So what I'm saying, in the words we use, right? If we, for example, if I was in Cape Town, besides saying salam, I would make a point of saying hufa, because I understand it's coding the language to suit the audience, right? Similarly in Joburg. But then we need to throw in a Sawubona. We need to throw that in. We need to know what's the greeting in the Malawian languages and the Somali languages and the Egyptians and all these type of people. But that's just one part of it. The other is expecting them to look a certain way. So, that's exactly my point. So it's basically what happened in white society in our country. One, they didn't want black South Africans. Two, they allowed it after 1990 or 94. B, then they expect you to fit into their standards. If you don't fit into their standards, like my neighbor is a good neighbor for a black chap. So by whose standard? So all I'm saying, these are rude awakening questions, and they're difficult questions. But I think every mosque has got to start taking these things very seriously. And the same, therefore, will go into the madrasas and the schools that we have. That greater effort has got to be into asking the difficult questions, but asking this very important question. When we carry a flag and say, Bilal was a slave, and then he was honored to become the mu'adhin of the mosque, right? And then we ask ourselves, but how do we use that flag as a trophy? But in reality, what have we done to raise the status of African Muslims in our country? And I'm not suggesting we're not giving charity, but I'm not talking about charity. No. I'm talking about serious interventions where you can change societies completely.
Indeed, thought-provoking questions you raised there, and I think maybe at a later stage you need to have an independent discussion just on these issues, because as you correctly mentioned, that they are rude awakening questions, but they are questions that if we don't answer sooner, rather than later, we could end up paying a very hefty price for that. Unfortunately, Ashraf, we've run out of time, but there's always the discussion, very fascinating. You leave us with a lot of food for thought. All the best with 2020 and with Champion SA.
Absolutely. And I'll repeat what I said around Champion South Africa. If there's nothing else you've remembered today, just remember this because it's important. Champion people build champion nations. And the question to you and to everybody watching is like, are you one of those champion people?
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
To the viewers, until next week, inshallah, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.